Can you see that slide, Floris? Is that okay?
Yeah, that's perfect. So
Good.
you're ready to go. Maybe a short introduction where we are. So this is Climate Cafe. I always organize this with Sydney. We have different speakers on the Tuesday, mostly about green infrastructure, but we have a lot of different topics. I'm really glad you're here, Joe Bradley. I really was really entertained with dirty pictures of high roads, the dirty water, and what we should do with purifying the water, maybe, or is it dirty or not? Those questions we had in Sudsnet last year. So I'm really glad you can give the floor. And there's quite a lot of people here, so we skipped around so to give you more speaking time, so to say. And I would say let's start when you're ready,
Thank you.
Joe. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you, Floris. So, I'm Joe Bradley. I work for a little charity called Stormwater Shepherds in the UK. Frankly, it's just me, but I work to reduce pollution from urban surfaces, and most of the time for the last couple of years I've worked on pollution from highway runoff. We do other things, but it's so interesting. I can't stop. We do suds. I'm going to use the term suds quite a lot. I know you all call them different things in different parts of the world, but let's stick with suds for today. This is a suds device in a city called Sheffield. It's beautiful, and we build these across England particularly. There's lots of them in Scotland and Wales as well, but I focus a lot on England. They're beautiful and they take the runoff from the highways, but we don't really understand the fate of the chemicals in that highway runoff once they go into that device. What happens to them? Where do they go? Some people believe that they magically disappear, but that's not true. And we really need to understand this better. This is why I get so agitated. So this is pollution off a motorway in England with about 120,000 vehicles a day. This is going into a tiny little stream and causing horrific pollution, and nobody's doing anything about it. And so I went out in the rain. I do that a lot, and took a sample of this runoff, and these are the results. I will share these, so don't worry if you don't get time to examine them in detail. But what the results show in the red boxes is that runoff was grossly polluted with polyaromatic hydrocarbons. So the levels of polyaromatic hydrocarbons in that runoff far exceeded the environmental quality standards. You can see the environmental quality standards there in that column, and then the results of analysis far exceeded those environmental quality standards. That's really important because the environmental quality standards are set to prevent acute pollution. It's what they're there for, that's what they do. And so these discharges are causing acute pollution every time it rains, and really nasty acute pollution every time it rains. This is another one. I've got loads of these. I'm only going to show you two. This is a discharge near my house, which is why I sample this one most often. This is again off the motorway, again about 120,000 vehicles a day. This discharges into a slightly bigger river, but it's a fishery. It's got fish in it. It's got flatfish in it. And this causes gross pollution every time it rains. The interesting thing about the results for this one, and again, I'll share these slides. On the right-hand side in that fourth column, the river is a little bit polluted upstream of the motorway. So there's a little bit of polyaromatic hydrocarbon pollution upstream of the motorway. And that's because there's roads and car parks already. But then the two columns on the left are the motorway discharge. So that's that stuff coming out of that pipe. And I took a sample of it. I took two samples, and it's grossly polluted. It fails the environmental quality standards. The river downstream of the motorway fails the environmental quality standards for those polyaromatic hydrocarbons. That's really important because the legislation, the Water Framework Directive, says that discharges mustn't be allowed to cause environmental quality standard failures downstream of the discharge in the river. And so we have explicit evidence here that motorway discharge is causing a breach of the environmental quality standards downstream in the river, which is illegal. So that's really useful, powerful information for me to take to the regulator and say, what are you doing? And that's why I take these samples. And I've put the link to the document with these results in the chat. So what's in there? It's not just about polyaromatic hydrocarbons. I focus on those because there is an environmental quality standard for them. But there is also an environmental quality standard for copper and zinc. And we know that copper and zinc are grossly poisonous and poisonous to aquatic creatures and fish. So we need to worry about those as well. My problem is I don't take enough samples to do an annual average. And so I can't say whether or not they fail the annual average quality standard. But I know that every time I take a sample, there are very high levels of dissolved copper and zinc. And there's also masses and masses and masses of these little tiny microplastic tire wear particles. And these are fairly new. We didn't really know about these until about 5 or 6 years ago. And everybody's doing research. There's millions of pounds being spent on research into these things at the moment. And every time anybody does any research, the results are horrific. So they find them in our blood, in our brains, in the placenta of babies. They find them in octopus brains. They find them in marine creatures. They find them in the fecal matter of birds that eat aquatic insects. They're just horrific. They leach out poisons that kill fish. They carry poisons into the bodies of aquatic organisms. They're horrific. So put together, it's just a dreadful picture, and we're not doing enough about it. The reason I worry about this pollution is mostly because in England, in the UK, we focus on lethal doses. So a lot of our toxicology stuff is based on lethal doses. These pollutants don't cause lethal effects, they cause sublethal effects. So they cause the behavior of the insects to change so that they can't escape their predators or they can't chase their prey. They cause mutations in the unborn creatures. They cause abortions. They cause eggs to fail to hatch. They cause effects on metabolism. They're endocrine disruptors. So they cause all this horrific harm, but because they don't actually explicitly kill the creatures, they've just gone. This pollution has gone undetected for, well, unregulated for years, and that really bothers me because that level of harm in our rivers and streams and oceans is just unforgivable, but we're not doing anything about it. And that then has a knock-on effect because those little insects that live in the river hatch and then become flying insects and they become part of the ecosystem. And so if we're killing all the insects or affecting the population of insects in the river, then we're affecting the population of everything. And as we all know in this room, biodiversity is in a state of collapse, and this is part of that problem. So as I said, I'm not going to talk about the chemistry. I'm not a chemist anyway, but more information on the sample results are in this report, and I've put the link to this report in the chat. So if you're interested in more detail, then please read that report. So why is nobody, I ask this question a lot, why is nobody doing anything about this? And they're not. In the UK, they're not. This problem has gone on for 40 years. We've known it's been a problem for 40 years and we do nothing. And I don't really know why, because there's another outfall from another highway in that picture there. That outfall goes into a beautiful little stream in the Lake District. The cattle drink from that stream. That stream supports a population of fish and insects. And yet that highway discharge is allowed to go in there every time it rains. That discharge is illegal. That discharge is breaking the law every time it rains. There's absolutely no question about that. And our environmental regulator, the Environment Agency, should make the owner of that outfall apply for a permit. And then the permit would say, you must treat your runoff to this extent in order to stop that pollution. So they wouldn't need to treat it completely. They would just have to reduce the pollution to such an extent that the river could tolerate it. But they don't. And I genuinely don't know why they don't. I've asked them lots of times, but it doesn't happen. And it's a frustration for me because if the highway operator had to apply for a permit, they would have to pay about £7,000. And so if every highway outfall paid the Environment Agency £7,000 to apply for a permit, the Environment Agency would have lots of money and they would be able to do this work. But for some reason, it's not happening. This problem doesn't only belong to highway authorities and motorways either. So in the UK, quite a lot of our highway runoff goes into the sewer. It might go into a surface water sewer like that one in that photograph. That outfall in the photograph belongs to the water company. So it's a surface water sewer that belongs to the water company, but it takes the runoff from that road that you can see straight into the river. And so some of these discharges don't belong to the highway authority, they belong to the water company. Some of the discharges go to the sewage works and they get at the wastewater treatment works and get treated at the wastewater treatment works. So some of the runoff doesn't even make it to the river. And some of it goes to ground. And so we've got quite a lot of discharges in England, particularly where the discharge of highway runoff goes straight into the ground. So this is an example. Oh, I hate this photo very much. The runoff from this road, which is a motorway, it's called an AM, so it's nearly a motorway. Huge traffic density, thousands of cars every day, and the runoff goes straight off the edge of the road and into that ditch. And that ditch is straight into the chalk. You can see the chalk in the photograph. And the rubber berms, the rubber dams are there to slow the flow down so that it soaks into the chalk. And we have no idea if that runoff is causing pollution of the groundwater. Nobody measures it. Nobody's properly done a risk assessment. Nobody knows if that chalk is fractured and if the runoff is going straight into the groundwater. And yet all across the chalk in the south of England, highway runoff just goes straight into the chalk. And it's horrific. There's no soil. I mean, there's not even any soil there to do the magic stuff. It's just straight into the rock and it's awful. Part of the problem is nobody measures it. I took these samples in the rain, in the dark, and you can see the bottle on the left is the river upstream. The two bottles in the middle are the discharge from the motorway, and the bottle on the right is the river downstream. And these are the bottles that you saw the analysis from earlier. So we know that this outfall is causing pollution. And frankly, we don't need the chemistry. You just look at the photograph and you go, that's causing pollution. That is a polluted discharge. But nobody's measuring that. The environmental regulator takes no samples of that. The highway operator takes no samples of that. Nobody samples the insects in the river downstream of that. Nobody measures for polyaromatic hydrocarbons in the river downstream of that because the environmental regulator only looks for polyaromatic hydrocarbons where they think they will find them. But because they don't recognise pollution from highway runoff, they don't look for polyaromatic hydrocarbons downstream of highway outfalls. Many of the Water Framework Directive monitoring points are miles downstream of the highway outfall. There's one site I deal with, and the WFT monitoring point is 3 miles away. So you're never going to capture this pollution. You're 3 miles downstream, but it's still causing pollution. And probably the most important reason why this pollution is never being dealt with is you have to do the sampling in the rain. You have to go out in heavy rain to get samples like that. And so nobody sees this pollution. Nobody's walking their dog. Nobody's swimming. Nobody's paddleboarding. The Environment Agency, although they do wet weather samples, a very small proportion of the samples they take are wet weather samples. So nobody understands and is measuring this pollution, which is why it's not being regulated and why we're in the place we are, and it's bad. But to try and be cheerful, a bit of good news, we can fix this. We know how to treat this runoff. This is a sustainable drainage system in a city called Sheffield. It's fantastic. It's the best sustainable drainage system we've got in England. The runoff from that road just comes into this bioremediation zone at the front of the photograph. So the runoff from the road goes straight in there, all the way along the length of the road. So the pollution is spread out across the surface of that bioremediation zone, and the sediment settles at the surface. There's a huge depth. There's about 2 meters of engineered soil. The groundwater beneath is meters away because we're in Sheffield. And so I'm happy that for that road, which is a medium traffic road, it's not very busy, the pollution will go into that bioremediation zone and it will be broken down, captured, assimilated, precipitated, volatilized. All those things will happen and the pollution will be managed by that sustainable drainage device beautifully. And we need thousands and thousands more of those across the whole of the UK. Some of them aren't quite so pretty, but just as good. So this is a swale. We call this a swale. I think Florist calls this a waddy, but same thing. It's a grassed area. The runoff goes off the road into there and then soaks into the soil. The sediment settles at the surface. Some of the pollutants are captured in the soil and they create habitats for wildlife and actually quite pretty edges to the road. And so these work. We know they work. We know they can deal beautifully with runoff from local roads like that with only a small traffic load. They deliver all the benefits we all know about. They're attractive. They are habitats for wildlife. They do flood risk management and they do water quality management. Fantastic. We need thousands more of those as well, but we haven't got very many. Then we move into filter drains, which I love. I love filter drains. Scotland. One day I'm going to go and live in Scotland because in Scotland they have these everywhere. They've got filter drains on almost every road. I like filter drains because they're good for amphibians. So in England we have gully pots at the side of the road with, I don't know if you have those in the Netherlands, but they've got catch pits and the amphibians fall in and die. These are great for amphibians because the road runoff goes into this filter drain. But if the amphibian happens to wander along, the amphibian can be fine as well. Huge capacity for treatment in a filter drain, huge capacity for attenuation, relatively cheap to build, a bit of a faff to maintain, but I still think that these are a fantastic option for busier roads. This is a busier road across the moors, and all the pollution goes in there and it's captured. And then every 15 or 20 years, you clean it out. Great solution. But when we're talking about motorways like the M25 around London with 300,000 vehicles a day, 300,000 vehicles a day, the pollution level is huge. We're talking about something worse than sewage at this point. And so vegetative devices, SUDs, low impact development, all those phrases, you can't use those here because the pollution load is so huge and the capacity of the soils is just not big enough. You have to have some sort of treatment device first. We tend to use these, which are vortex grit separators in the UK. They capture some of that sediment. They might take out about 40% of the sediment in the runoff before it then goes into a pond where you get sedimentation and further treatment. But we definitely will look for something like this first, and that captures the gross pollution. Then the runoff goes into a sedimentation pond, a big sedimentation pond. We were looking for capture of something like the M560 rainfall event across the catchment for probably 24 to 48 hours. So these are big ponds, and that's where you get sedimentation of the rest of the pollution, and you get all those natural processes. You get sunshine and you get volatilization and precipitate. So all that happens in the pond. So ponds are great, but only if you've taken some of the sediment out first, or else your pond just turns into a toxic swamp. And then sometimes we need tertiary treatment. We haven't done much of this in England yet, and it's rubbish. We should, because sometimes you just need to polish the runoff a little bit before you put it back into a river or stream or into the ocean. And I think we need to use more tertiary treatment filters. We don't use them yet, but I'm asking for a lot. And then we need to worry about the long term. What happens? I know Sydney said he was doing research into what happens to those pollutants when they're in your device. And this is a swale, this is a flooded swale. So what's happening to those toxic metals and polyaromatic hydrocarbons in there? Are they being taken up by the soil? Are they being broken down by microorganisms? We need to understand what's going on, and we need to understand how long will that do that before it becomes a contaminated land site? And what do we do with it then? So it's too easy to go, oh, we'll shove it in a swale, it'll be fine. We need to understand what happens in the long term. And this is even worse. This is a pond that takes motorway runoff that's never been maintained. And now it's just full. You can see that it's full of sediment at the front of the photograph. It's full of reeds, which are great, but that's not what it's supposed to be, a pond. And it's actually got trees growing out of it. So it's just become a poisonous swamp. It's horrible. And it's never been maintained. It's been there 40 years and it's never been maintained. And this is the stuff that we get. So if you've got a vortex grit separator, this is what you catch. And I love these photographs because this is what this is it by catching this, we're stopping it from going into the river. So if you imagine that there's 25,000 outfalls off our motorways and 1 million outfalls off all our roads, and every time it rains, it's putting that black sludge into our rivers, that's why we need to treat this stuff, because that's horrible. Whatever we build, we have to maintain it. This is a horizontal sediment separator. So we use these where we need to be shallow, working, not digging too deep a hole. They need to be emptied. Nobody empties them in the UK. We've got a massive problem with legacy devices that are not being looked after. And the highway authorities go, we've got no money. And I say, I don't care, you're breaking the law. And we've got to have that argument about, if you build a treatment scheme, you have to maintain it. You can't just go, well, we've got no money, because then you're breaking the law again. You've spent £500,000 building it, and then you stop looking after it. And that's true of vegetative. People go, oh, it's all right, suds don't need any maintenance. They're just green spaces, but they do need maintenance. They need litter picking, they need pruning, they need mowing, they need their inlets clearing out. So even suds, even really lovely suds like the ones in Sheffield, need some maintenance. They need to be looked after. And then finally, we've got to pay for this. We've got no money. I don't know if you've got any money. I don't know how the Netherlands is doing for money at the moment. But certainly the UK has got no money, and nobody wants to pay for this work, and we've got to find a way. And I think maybe we put a levy on tyres, so that every time you buy a tyre, you pay an extra 10 quid, £10, and that goes into a pot. Or every time you buy a brake pad, or you pay more road tax, pardon me, or you pay a stormwater utility levy like they have in Germany. So for your home or your business or your factory, you pay a fee related to the amount of surface, impermeable surface you've got. But somehow, somebody has to find loads of money. And so hopefully next time I talk to you all, we will have a new fund for delivering treatment schemes for highway outfalls, and I'll be happy. So just to finish, that's just another photo of another outfall. But we know this stuff is toxic. We know these discharges are illegal. We desperately need to regulate them, that we desperately need to treat them. And when we do treat them, we need to be honest about how good our sud schemes are and how long they will last without maintenance. How often do we have to maintain them? How often should we go into our swale and scrape off the topsoil? How often should we suck all the stones out of our filter drain? How often should we empty our pond? And we need to work that out and fix it. That's it. See, I was quite quick.
That was really quick. You said 45 minutes.
Good.
You still owe us 15 minutes, so you have to come back. But
no, well, we'll hopefully we'll get some questions and we can talk about other things in the questions.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I'll share the slides, Floris, if people want them.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and I'm sure they do. So maybe, yeah, stop sharing and we can open up the floor as well for any questions there are here for Joe.
If nobody asks any questions, I'll just keep talking.
Oh, we have lots of questions.
We have questions.
I think people are shy, but otherwise Sydney and me will ask questions. But I'm really glad. Yeah, it started off, maybe a short summary. It started off quite depressing, and you used the word frustrations. And luckily, we had some devices like swales. Indeed, we call them wadis in the Netherlands, and the rain gardens and the sedimentation basins, and that's very comparable to the Netherlands as well. And also, there's a lack of capacity and money sometimes. So that's we feel the frustration maybe. But and of course, there are a lot of measurements in the Netherlands too that show that polyaromatic hydrocarbons, heavy metals are quite high. So I think we're in the same situation. But I hope that.
Floris, do you have any regulation? Do highway authorities have to treat their highway runoff?
That's a very good question. I can answer it, but I also know that maybe I open up the floor that maybe Tristan from Rijkswaterstaat. I don't want to put you on the spot, or maybe Dick, you want to reflect maybe on the presentation. Is that okay? I see you unmute yourself, Tristan. Would be great to have your views as well.
Yes, of course. I work for Rijkswaterstaat, the Dutch Highway Authority. Among also part of the water system is also part of our management. But we're talking here about highways. I had a question regarding the UK highways. Are there a percentage of how many are in sewage, or is that known?
It is sort of known. So the motorways, all our motorways are not in the sewer. So motorways don't go to sewer usually. But in some cities, so in Liverpool, all the highway runoff goes to sewer. In the middle of Liverpool city, all of it. So it depends where you are. So in cities, especially older cities, most of the highway runoff will go into the sewer. But as you move out into the villages and towns and into the newer towns and into the countryside, then none of the highway runoff will go in the sewer.
And does it then go directly into the surface water, or will it also go via the soil?
No, so usually it goes into the sewer and down to the sewage works unless it rains. And then when it rains, our sewers overflow. So the whole thing overflows. So the sewage and the highway runoff go into the river, which is probably worse.
Yes. Yeah. In our case, about 80% goes to the I think you call it a verge, the roadside, and we see that the verge in combination with open asphalt cleans the water enough to not make us treat it even more. So,
okay. So similar to a swale.
Yeah, but still 20% is directly discharged to the surface water, and we don't really know what happens with that. So I'm not sure if it's smart to say that, but let's be open about it.
Yeah.
You can say everything, and otherwise we cut it out, Tristan. There's no problem.
Okay.
No, it's the situation it is, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I was wondering if you also had measurements on microplastics.
I don't, but our national highways, which is our they operate major roads. They've just recently done some research into microplastics, which I can share. I'll write that down.
Yes, please.
Because that was a £3 million project or something. And also in Sweden, they're doing a huge amount of work on microplastic tire wear particles. I'll try and find a link to that as well.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Yeah, cool.
There was also a topic at SatsNet where Joe and I met last time, where she had a keynote and had the same frustration, the same solutions as well. So that's nice. Yeah.
What sort of traffic densities do you have, Tristan, in the Netherlands? How busy are your roads?
Busy, but I don't know any numbers. Dick, can you? We can look it up.
Oh wow!
It's all open data, but I don't know it by heart.
Okay. Because that's how we decide how polluting a road is. We have categories, so we take the traffic density, and that tells us how polluting the road will be.
I believe the Germans do the same, but we don't do that.
Exactly, we don't do that yet, hopefully, because there are still more indications that it is usable, but it really matters on how you where you sample and what you sample. And that's an introduction to my question, because Joe, you sample directly from the sewer pipes mostly, right? That go from the highway, yeah. And like Christian told you, in the Netherlands, not to brag or something, but we have it quite right with those verges that are often well vegetated. They have a capacity to treat the water, or at least absorb it, and later to be remediated or wat is gesaneerd in het Engels. well, the sand is taken out if it's too polluted. So that we do that quite all right here. But the measurements from where the water goes and where it comes from, those are, well, different. And every time I know Floris does some research on it. Rijkswaterstaat does some research on it. But if you don't have a sewer pipe, like I saw in your pictures, what do you think is the best place to measure the water? So for more a diffuse runoff, that are often the problems we are seeing here in the Netherlands to determine diffuse pollution. Do you have
Yeah,
looked into that?
if you're just trying to sample what's coming off the road and going into the verge, I would literally just dig a small dip and take a sample as it runs off the road, because that tells you what's coming off the road. How you sample at the bottom of the sand, there are ways of doing that. So you can, I know groundwater specialists have clay equipment that you bury it into the verge, and it only captures the water from the bottom of the verge, and you could use those for sampling what's at the bottom. But just to sample what's running off the road, I literally just stand at the side of the road with a little spade and dig a little hole and take a sample of what's coming into the little hole.
Yeah, okay. It's interesting. And the other thing that's interesting is the way to sample it in the soil, because that's something we're looking at in the Netherlands now also, like what's the best way to do that. Hopefully we start a project in Nijmegen really soon. But we're all starting right now, so we're already always glad with other ideas on how to do that. So
Yeah,
thank you already.
yeah, the difficulty. I mean, I'm lucky because I just take water samples and then I compare the results with the water, the quality standards for water. When
Yeah.
you're looking at the soil in your verge, then you need different quality standards to measure
Well,
against.
yeah, but that's the thing. We are looking at the soil quite a lot. Floris also looked at the soil quite a lot. And I've done some research in Nijmegen here in the municipality to the soil. But the only thing we know about the pollution that's coming out is mostly from the water boards that did some research. And I think Antal's also here. He also did some research on it. But it's also not done. It's not always done. I know Rijkswaterstaat does it at some important points, but we don't really have a standard in approaching that.
No, well, we don't have a standard.
We also
I
don't. No, you
just
have a standard probably.
yeah.
Yeah, but that's what I like, because you are the one that's taking all those water samples. Actually, how do you analyze it? Do you
I
have?
I don't do that. I have a
Yeah.
laboratory that do the analysis,
Okay.
but I use a commercial laboratory, so I have to be careful to use an accredited laboratory so that people can't complain that I've just made the numbers up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because some people don't like me, so they try and say that I've made the numbers up.
Yeah, and then you have to point, so no, we have accredited
Yeah,
lab that says the
yeah,
same. Yeah,
yeah.
that's how it goes, sadly. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Or
Because we
remarks?
I
go
was
through.
wondering if England or the UK ever used open tarmac. We have open tarmac top layer, and part of the pollutants are captured in that, and we clean it twice a year. I was wondering if it's also a thing in England.
No, they've done some trials with it, so that it was trialed a little bit. We use it for residential roads where there's not very much traffic. The couple of problems is the water goes down, so the pollution goes down, and then you've got no control over the pollution going down into the ground. So that's a concern. Also, there can be problems with the water going down into the sub base of the road and affecting the engineering structure of the road. But also we wouldn't sweep it. So anything that needs regular maintenance in order to function well is a risk, because we know that our highway authorities don't have the money to undertake regular maintenance. So we're actually in a position now where our highway authorities will say, well, we don't want that device because we'll have to empty it. And I say, but every device will need maintenance, but they're actually now selecting devices that if they don't maintain them, it doesn't matter so much. And that's awful. That's awful because they're being driven by money. And so they wouldn't, so permeable paving, which is a little bit like your permeable tarmac to permeable asphalt, the permeable block pavers, the concrete block pavers, they don't like using those because they need to be swept. And they're like,
Yeah.
well, we haven't got the money to sweep them. I'm like, well, whatever you do, you're going to have to maintain it.
And the nice thing
So,
about the open tarmac is there's still closed tarmac below, so the
okay,
discharge is still towards the verge. So it's
okay.
still concentrated in the verge. And the vluchtstrook, how do you say that in England? In English?
Escape route. No, I don't know. The side escape street.
Where the drainage
Safety
goes.
right.
Yeah, the most right lane, or in your case, the most left lane where there's no traffic.
Yeah.
At a certain amount of time, little plants start growing there, and then we
Oh.
know, okay, we have to clean this because then it becomes a traffic safety issue,
Okay.
and that's a reason for us to clean it. And I must say, we don't clean it for pollutants. That's
Yeah.
just nice that the pollutants are also gone, but it's mainly because of the traffic safety issue.
Safety. And I mean, that's the problem, isn't it? Is that highway authorities, the priority of our highway authorities is free flowing traffic and the safety of the road user. And that's so all the money, what money there is all spent on those aspects. So on making sure that the road doesn't flood, making sure that everything's safe and the traffic keeps going. And so the money for water quality just disappears. They even spend more money on landscape and making sure that there's a nice view when you're driving along the motorway than they do on the water quality, because people can see that. I'm going to get a big sign and stand at the side of the motorway and saying this stuff is causing pollution, because maybe people would see that then.
You also spoke about the Water Framework Directive. Is that still applicable in England now you're out of the EU?
Yeah, it is for now because we have domestic regulations that enacted it in the UK. However, it does mean that our government could change those domestic regulations if they wanted to. I don't know actually. I don't like the Water Framework Directive, but we do still have it for now.
You don't like it?
No.
Okay, because?
Because we had very effective legislation to control
Mhm.
water quality before the Water Framework Directive.
Okay.
And what happened when the Water Framework Directive arrived was that they took hundreds of people within the Environment Agency and said, go away and do the Water Framework Directive. So those people were sent to do spreadsheets and river basin plans and all that stuff. And those were a lot of those people were the fantastic people who used to be out in their wellies dealing with water pollution, and they just moved them all. And then nobody was actually out in their Wellington boots dealing with water pollution. It diverted a great deal of money away from field work and shifted it into desk-based work, which was never a good idea.
That's really interesting because I think it's kind of the other way around here in the Netherlands. At least at my municipality, everybody is now like on high alert, like, oh, we have to start measuring our water right now because the water frame directive is coming. It's not, they're not panicking yet, but we're making plans for it because of the water framework directive. But I think that's because we lacked it already in some cases.
Yeah, and unfortunately, because we have now left the changes to the Urban Wastewater Directive, some of which are really cool, we won't enact. So some of the stuff that I would love to see, so the extended producer responsibility that says that pharmaceutical companies have to pay for quaternary treatment to wastewater treatment works, that's a fantastic piece of legislation. But I don't know if we'll get that because we don't have all the nice things anymore.
All
Yeah.
right.
So maybe other questions from the floor, or maybe Stan or Dick, did you see anything, maybe innovation that we can put in the INO 58? A very specific question, but I thought you unmuted yourself, Stan. You want to ask something? Oh, we
You're
don't
still.
hear you.
Oh,
Yeah,
we don't hear you, Stan.
yeah, that's the problem. Okay. Feel free to put your question in the chat so we address it. Yeah.
Okay. I'd like to ask a question then, Floors.
Yeah, sure.
Because I'm curious if you can answer this question, but because of climate change, the stormwater runoff will increase. Do you also see that this will affect the contamination? Or will it be the same or maybe cleaner? Or what way would it go?
I don't think it'll be cleaner. I had this argument with somebody. The pollution is directly related to the number of vehicles and the amount of travel that the vehicles do. So you get so many grams of microplastic tire wear particles per tire per mile or per kilometre, and so many grams of copper and zinc per vehicle per kilometre. So in theory, the pollutant load is directly related to the number of vehicles and not to the traffic, not to the weather or the climate. But there are some things. So very hot weather, I think, can cause more tire wear particles because the tires become softer or stickier. And I think, very wet weather can cause more pollution because people are using more fluids in their vehicles, so screen wash and de-icer and antifreeze. So I think there are some things that will change the pollutant load, but fundamentally, it's the traffic density that affects the pollutant load and not the climate, I think.
Yeah, but maybe you get some peak loads from the first flush that are bigger than before.
Yes, absolutely. And we're already seeing that in the UK. We're already seeing these horrific summer storms, which completely overwhelm everything. And the pollution from those is awful. Yeah, and we can't design treatment systems for highway runoff that can cope with those, 1% probability storms, or is it? Yeah, well, the really rare storms, those really big storms. Our treatment systems, in fact, your grass verges, I don't imagine your grass verges can cope with those either. The rain comes so fast and so hard, it just overwhelms everything.
Yeah, but you're not aware of that if there's been done detailed research on this?
No,
Okay. Thanks. Yeah.
we're so far behind on the research that's probably on the list of things to do. But I say that we've been doing research into pollution from highway runoff for over 40 years, and we've known this stuff was poisonous for over 40 years. So why we are still not regulating and controlling it, I do not know.
It's a good recommendation to do more monitoring. And with temperatures going up, the water quality, of course, changes. The toxic swamp, that will be an effect for sure. Yeah. And
also the fish, as the temperatures go up, the fish become less resilient, then less able to cope with toxic shock. So yeah, it will have effects. But maybe it'll make the microorganisms more active. So the microorganisms will break down the pollution more quickly. I don't know.
Could be.
More research needed. That's always what researchers say. So, shall we try your sound again, Stan, or doesn't it work? No. Okay.
Let's put it in the chat.
Let's have a look.
Oh, sorry. I didn't look at the chat as a moderator. Yeah. How do you look at climate change? Isn't it a great opportunity that we can gather water from the highway, treat it, store it, and use it in times of shortage? It also gives us a chance to win materials out of the sludge.
Yeah. So certainly capturing rainwater from highways with low traffic is a fantastic idea, and we do that. I mean, SUDs do that anyway. So in SUDs in the UK often have an attenuation tank underneath, so the highway runoff will go off over the rain garden and then into a tank, and then you can use that water in the summer to irrigate plants, keep plants alive, keep landscapes healthy, that sort of thing. So that's a good idea. I just get a bit twitchy when people say they'll do it with motorway runoff, which is so toxic. that I don't think we should reuse that. But certainly for roads in towns and cities, we should definitely be reusing that water. The sludge thing is a massive problem because the more treatment we deliver, the more sludge we create. And there is palladium and rhodinium and platinum and copper and zinc in that sludge. But for the moment, nobody has worked out how to get that out and turn it into a viable, useful thing. I was working with some students recently who were trying to make ink and paint, black ink and black paint from the sludge from highway runoff, and they had some success, but it's a very small market. Somebody else is thinking about turning it into biochar, and whether or not it can be a feedstock for biochar. And I don't know whether it can, because it's quite organic. I don't know. But certainly lots of people are talking about all those things, what to do with the sludge and how to reuse the water. So yeah, the conversations are happening.
Yeah. You got a thumbs up from Stan. We
Thanks,
can hear,
Stan.
but
Yeah.
so that means good. And probably if you have best management practices, we can follow up on that. That will be nice to see, because we're in the Netherlands always looking for some innovations that we can try out here. So
Okay.
and most of the systems you showed are here, but also sometimes lack of maintenance and the usual problems. But it will be great to keep in touch on that. So
Yeah, I had a question about the vortex filtration, because you were really a fan of it, I noticed. And I was wondering if you have research on effective on the percentages of effective of those things, because here in the Netherlands at this moment we actually have a booming business, or I'm not sure if it's a booming business, but we've got a lot of people that are developing pre-purification before it goes into a swale or a pond. But for me, I'm working at the municipality, so I have to choose the right one. Big pressure. And with all these different options, it's pretty hard to find the right one. But
Yeah.
you are like showing one and basically saying this is it. This is what you need to do.
Yeah, vortex grit separators are they're just a workhorse. So if you stick them in at the top of your drainage infrastructure, they'll take out maybe 30 or 40% of the solids.
Okay.
But that's just a really good start. And then you go on to a pond or a basin or a swale or something else. But it just stops all that toxic sediment going into your vegetative devices that creatures live in, their habitats for wildlife. The vortex grit separators are small, and they function with this spiral flow. What's the word? I can't remember, but the flow goes round. They're not brilliant, and different manufacturers are better than some manufacturers are better than others. But they do a good job, and as long as you empty them every couple of years, I like them. I also showed the horizontal separators, which are long. They have a longer residence time, and the sedimentation is slower, and they perhaps remove more sediment. We don't have research really of how they operate in the field. We just use the test results that the manufacturers test. But we have a British test that they can do, or they use the German DIBT test, or they use the American NJCAT test. So they must test the product to put it on the market and claim that it removes a certain amount of pollution. And we use those test results. All I know is that when we go on site to empty them, they are full of sludge. So they're doing something. They're doing something right, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, and we did some research in the Netherlands as well using the DIBT test. It was actually part of my PhD in the TU Delft, so that was a lot of fun. But you get a lot of sludge, but mostly these are the coarse grain sizes that don't attach a lot of pollutants. So there's this difference. So we don't use them a lot actually in the Netherlands, but still around highways we have some lamel filters, vortex filters, and of course they are as good as the maintenance has been done. So that's also I think an attention point here.
And you see, we don't use lamella. I don't know why we don't use lamella filters, because I think they're a great idea.
So we don't think that anymore in the Netherlands.
Do you not
Because
like
of
them?
because of maintenance, mostly they get clogged more often. It's really hard to predict if you need more maintenance on and like for Nijmegen, for example, we stopped using them completely, and more cities in the Netherlands stopped that. But there could always become a new version of it that might work. So, but we don't have it yet. No.
No, let's see what we can do.
Yeah. Shall we slowly close off? I mean, some people left, but give you an applause and really thumbs up to you, Joe. They have to go home and eat and stuff and family things. So if there's no any last questions from you, and then we give a dramatic pause. Then indeed, thanks, Borders. Give a virtual applause, of course, Joe. I think we really enjoyed and your offer to give some more information and this presentation as well. I will spread it around, so that's really good. Thanks a lot. And well, I didn't forget, we still have 50 minutes from you, so you have to come back when you have new research. Then next week, Sydney, I think we give you the floor.
Yeah, exactly. For a change now, I'm going to present something myself, actually linked to this topic, because in Nijmegen we also did research to the pollution in the soil of the bioswales. And what is quite interesting to just say something about already, we also see a relationship between the bigger roads with more traffic compared to the smaller roads with less traffic. However, our results are just indicative. They're not scientifically approved or anything, but still very interested, and we are going to use it to make our management plan for our bioswales. So yeah, if you want to know more about it, come see us next week again.
That's
perfect.
Will do.
I will. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and that's probably in Dutch, but if you come, Joe or Will, you're more than welcome to join us, and it would be great to have a presentation from you as well, by the way, Will. But then Sydney will switch to English. He's working on an international scientific paper, so I don't think it's a problem. It's a great exercise, I would say. So, actually, in every 4 weeks we do English. So Katarina's coming from Germany to talk about the constructed wetlands, actually. So that's in about 3 weeks, I think. So and it's all on the agenda that has been shared with Outlook. So okay. With no further ado, I would say thanks again, Joe, and everything participating, and see you hopefully next week. Have a great evening.
Brilliant.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.
So